Hi and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. My name is Jess. Today's video is going to be my October and November reading wrap up. I decided not to do an October wrap up because I didn't actually read that many books, and then by the time I was kind of going backwards and forwards on whether to do one, it was too late. So I thought I would just combine October and November together. So let's jump in and start talking about some books. So the first book that I finished in the month of October is actually one of my favourite books of the year. I'm so pleased that I decided to pick it up, and that is The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is not the book that I thought it was, which is becoming a bit of a running theme on this channel. For some reason I thought this was like a highwaymen heist on a train story. I don't know if that book exists and I've muddled that up with this, but I thought that that was what this was, and it's not. But I still thought that this was just brilliant. It was so well executed. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So this is about Locke Lamora, who is a thief in the city of Camor. He is part of a criminal underworld, and he pays fealty to the kind of the head don in this city, and he runs with a group of his friends. They create cons and they basically steal money from the wealthy families and the wealthy merchants in this city. And it's not like a morally grey Robin Hood type story, because Locke is stealing the money and the riches entirely for himself. And then in the middle of Locke running one of the biggest cons of his career, someone starts killing off some of the other criminal gangs in the city, and so Locke and his friends are not only trying to complete this con, but they're also trying to find out what is going on and stay alive, basically. As I say, it was just so brilliantly done. The writing style is incredibly dry and almost sarcastic, and I really loved how there were several moments in the book where it felt like a nod and a wink to us as readers, like, yeah, we really know what's going on, don't we, kind of thing. It was excellent. I really enjoyed it. I loved the characters. It's not like a morally grey type of scenario. These are not good people. They are thieves, they are murderers, they are bad people. They make bad decisions, they are selfish, they're out for themselves. They do have a code among the criminals, but yeah, these are not good people. There's no kind of redemptive story arc coming within this book. It's about bad people doing bad things, but you're kind of rooting for them anyway, and it's entertaining along the way. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 5 stars, would highly recommend. I will say that you kind of have to hit the ground running with this book, and for at least the first 30 or 40 pages I just had to kind of go along with it. You don't get any kind of steady introduction to the world or the city or the names of other places or the characters, and there are quite a lot. It talks a little bit about the political structure and the history and what came before and what's going to come after, and there's a whole lot of information just delivered to you like you know already what the author is talking about, but of course you don't know. And so I just kind of went along with it, and then eventually bits and pieces started to make sense. But it is very much full immersion into the world. Off we go, here's the story, here are your characters, run. There's no gentle intro, so just be aware of that. But as I say, I gave it 5 stars, loved it. The next book that I read, I actually listened to on audiobook, and that was The Maid by Nita Prose. This is a mystery thriller, I guess, about a maid called Molly who works at a very prestigious hotel, and one day while she's going about her cleaning duties, she comes across the dead body of a very notorious and wealthy regular client of the hotel, and various different things happen, but essentially Molly finds herself accused of murdering this guest, and she has to work with a couple of other people, some of her friends at the hotel, to clear her name, but also to find out what actually has gone on. And she discovers that perhaps things at the hotel are not quite as they might seem on the surface. On the whole, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really entertaining. I liked the mystery element. I thought there was just enough of the tension and the high stakes. I liked Molly as a main character. I thought the audiobook was really good. As I say, very, very entertaining. But there was just a small niggle that I had that ran throughout the whole of the book, and I can't quite decide how I feel about it. And that's sort of affecting my overall final thoughts on the book. So it's very similar to the likes of The Cactus, and Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine in that Molly as our main character is quite clearly neurodivergent, and to some degree she acknowledges that. So she tells us that she struggles to read social cues and people's expressions, and therefore struggles in social interactions. She sees and processes things quite differently, and that is essentially what leads to her being accused of the murder, because she comes across as really cold and detached, and they think that therefore she must have committed this murder. And she's also very, very literal in her responses. So there's various different things that happen, and as I say, to some degree that's acknowledged. And I think the author has also portrayed Molly as quite an unreliable narrator. I certainly got the feeling all the way through that Molly wasn't being 100% honest with us in terms of how aware she was of the various different things that were going on. And I genuinely thought for the vast majority of the book that at some point she was gonna kind of have a look to read a moment where I was like, haha, tricked you, or something like that. That doesn't actually happen. And throughout the story there are various things that happen that are quite humorous in terms of the way that Molly interacts and the way that Molly responds, but I could never quite put my finger on whether we were meant to be laughing with Molly or we were meant to be laughing at Molly. Now, if Molly is more aware than she was letting on, then that would be very much, to me, be a case of laughing with her. But because it's never really resolved how aware she is, it therefore leaves me thinking we were meant to be laughing at Molly, and obviously one is far more preferable than the other, and I couldn't quite decide which way round it was, and so ultimately it just left me feeling a little bit uncomfortable. As I say, on the whole I really, really enjoyed it. It is very similar to the likes of Eleanor Oliphant and The Cactus. If you like that type of story, that's great, but there was never really a full acknowledgement of the neurodivergence of Molly, or actually how aware she was overall of these things. So just not sure. I wanted to give it 4.5 stars, but I've ended up giving it 3 stars because I genuinely I'm not sure. And I would be really interested actually if anyone else has read it, what their read of it was, what their take on that was, if that was an element that even occurred to you at all, or whether I'm just reading too much into things. Very interested to know, so do let me know that. The next book that I read was my book club's pick for October. We wanted a spooky atmospheric read, so I picked up The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. I have filmed a whole reading vlog of my reading experience of this book, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. This is also a mystery thriller, but with a paranormal element to it, and I actually gave this book 2.5 stars. It was my least favourite book. I think it's my least favourite book that I have read this year actually, and I'll tell you why. There were just various elements for me that didn't work. I was relieved to some degree because I went in thinking that this was going to be far more of a paranormal story than it transpired to be, and I don't really enjoy that kind of book, but I was willing to go along for the experience and the journey. And then I actually thought that element ended up being really quite weak, and the author only really used the paranormal element when it was convenient for making something happen in the plot that couldn't have logically happened in any other way. There were various plot inconsistencies with our mystery. It read very much like a YA. I thought the writing was quite weak. And also we're following 2 characters. I realise now that I haven't told you what the story is about. So we have a present day timeline with Carly, who is going to investigate the disappearance of her aunt, which took place some 20 or so years before. Her aunt was working at the Sundown Motel when she mysteriously vanished. Her body was never found. There was no trace of her, and Carly is going back to find out what happened, to retrace her steps essentially. And she does. She ends up getting a job at the Sundown Motel. She ends up having quite a lot of similar experiences to that of her aunt. So we're reading Carly's story, and then we're also flicking back in time to Viv's story in the build-up to her disappearance. Because Carly is retracing the steps of Viv, we're essentially reading a very repetitive story, and it was very difficult sometimes to differentiate between the voices of Carly and Viv. It just felt very samey. There wasn't really a lot of difference, wasn't really a lot to kind of capture my attention, so I didn't really enjoy that element. At the Sundown Motel, as I say, there's this paranormal element. There's something going on that isn't quite right. It starts really strongly and then it just sort of peters out as the story goes along. So I think if you like ghost stories, if you like paranormal stories, this might not actually be one that you enjoy. If you like your stories to just have a touch of that, then you might enjoy this one, especially if you go in expecting it to be kind of a very easy to read YA style story. You might enjoy it. I obviously went in expecting something quite different and then had a bit of an issue with it. I didn't mind the final reveal, I didn't mind the final mystery. I thought that was quite well done, but just on the whole there wasn't enough for me to really feel like I was hooked and captured. And actually I think I gave it 3.5 stars when I finished it, and then after the discussion I downgraded it to 2.5 stars, because through talking with the rest of the group I realised that actually I didn't enjoy it very much at all. It wasn't for me. I wouldn't really look to pick up anything else by this author. And I think that I'm not trying to slate this author. I'm just saying for me I didn't connect with the writing style or the story being told, and so I just, yeah, can't necessarily say that I would recommend this book. Another book that I'm not going to talk too much about was my next read, which is The Silence of Scheherazade by Daphne Suman. I filmed my reading experience of this, which is for a series that I'm doing, so I haven't released that vlog yet, but I'm not going to reveal too much of what I thought about it because I'm going to save it for the vlog. So this is historical fiction. It starts in the early 1900s and is set in the city of Smyrna, which is now known as Izmir, at the heart of what was then the Ottoman Empire. And there was a huge event which took place in the late 1920s, I think, where the city ended up in flames, and there were various different things that contributed to that. It was a place of lots of political to and fro, so it was a city of commerce, and so there were lots of different countries who had a vested interest in the city and in controlling the politics of the city, and all of this kind of created a smelting pot, basically. A smelting pot? A melting pot? And basically the city ends up in complete upheaval, and we're following a number of different characters. Because it was a city of commerce, it was also a city where people from lots of different countries and cultures came to live. And so we are following, I'm gonna have to read it off the back because I actually cannot remember and I want to get it 100% correct. We're following characters from a Levantine background, a Greek background, a Turkish background and an Armenian background, and we're seeing how they interact in the city. We're seeing how their stories intertwine. We're seeing how their different cultures all came together, and basically we're following each character as we head towards this culminating event, which is when the city ends up in flames. I enjoyed this. I'm not going to say too much more about it. As I say, do look out for the vlog in which I talk about this. Hopefully it'll come up. It's going to be early in the new year because I'm currently pressing pause on these to read some festive Christmassy books, so it won't be out just yet, but early in the new year will be the first installment of this particular series of vlogs. So I think I will say, because I do like to recommend books, if you like historical fiction, if you like quite dense, very character heavy stories, you might want to have a look at this one. That's all I'm going to say. Next up, I listened to People of Abandoned Character by Claire Whitfield. This is historical fiction set in the 1880s. We are following our main character Susanna, who has come from very humble background. She is working as a nurse, and in order to get herself financial security, she makes the hasty decision to marry a surgeon, who then transpires to not be a very pleasant person. And Susanna begins to suspect that her husband might be involved in a series of murders which are taking place across the city of London, and we basically watch Susanna unravel as she tries to find out what on earth is going on, and as everything that she thought existed doesn't. She is in a quite horrible home environment. The staff that live there are not very pleasant. There's just this really quite vile undertone to everything that she does. She discovers that there are plenty of people of abandoned character within the city of London, and that her husband is very much a part of that scene, and I can't really say much more than that without beginning to give away large elements of the story. There's definitely a mystery, crime, thriller element to this story, quite similar to some of the other books that I have read recently. I must have just been in the mindset for that, and I thought that it was fairly well executed. My only real issue with the book is that the characters are not very memorable, but also none of them are likeable. I didn't even really care for Susanna, our main character. I felt like a lot of the situations that she found herself in were avoidable, and she could have just made different decisions and her circumstances would have changed and turned out differently. So yeah, I didn't really love any of the characters, but again, for an easy to listen to audiobook that is fairly entertaining. It is quite dark, and there are quite dark elements to it, and not very pleasant things happen to Susanna, so definitely worth looking up for trigger warnings and things like that if it's something that you need to be aware of. But yeah, on the whole it was just a solid 3-star read. It was okay, it was nothing to write home about. I enjoyed listening to it, but not very memorable. Then I read Bellman and Black by Diane Setterfield, and I loved this book. I fully expected to enjoy it. Diane Setterfield being the author of 2 of my favourite books, The 13th Tale and Once Upon a River. Didn't really know what to expect, and actually this is nothing like those 2 books in terms of its themes and its writing style and its delivery. I think it's quite different, and I think it would be interesting if you pick this book up and then you've read her other stuff, how that might affect you versus reading her other stuff and then coming back to this one. Anyway, we're following our main character, William Bellman, who at the very beginning of the book is with some of his friends, and he fires a stone out of a catapult and kills a rook. And from that point we follow his life. We follow his life as he becomes quite a successful businessman. He opens a death emporium in London, and then again, very similar to People of Abandoned Character, we watch his slow decline, and all the time you're just not quite sure if everything that happens to William and all the things that happen to him eventually are somehow connected to this moment, this pinnacle moment when he is just a 10-year-old boy and he kills this rook. And I honestly don't want to say much more than that, because part of what makes Diane Setterfield's writing so good is how atmospheric it is, but how immersive it is as well. So very much want to just go in and be a part of the story and follow her characters and see what happens to them. And there's no real like high stakes, there's no real mystery. You're just following William's life, but the things that happen to him and how he moves in the world and how he interacts, and just it was just so good. There is just something about her writing which I find incredibly engaging, and I feel like she could be telling me any kind of story and I would really love it. Everything about it, as I say, is atmospheric, it's rich, there is a sense of tension and anticipation that runs all the way through, and it feels almost like it could be a ghost story, but not really. Like you're just skirting the edges of death all the time, particularly because obviously William creates this death emporium, but also because of various other things that happen. You just feel like death's just on your shoulder all the way through as you are reading the book. But then it is also about life, and it's about taking opportunities and seizing the day, and honestly could talk for ages about it. It was brilliant, loved it, highly recommend. And then another great book that I read was Death in the East by Abir Mukherjee. This is the 4th book in the Banerjee and Wyndham detective mystery series, which is set in the early 1900s, the 1920s in India. So at the time of the British Empire being in India, but a lot of political upheaval and unrest as well. And I can't tell you, for obvious reasons, because this is the 4th book, I can't tell you too much about the story, because as with most of these series, it's about the journey that you go on with the characters. I will say that this was the best one yet. It was just done really well, I think, because we're very established. I'm very established now as the reader with Wyndham and with Banerjee and Where the Rat, their character flaws, all of that. It's just really comfortable to kind of go back in and read about their stories. This one was a little bit different because we had our 1920s timeline when we're predominantly following Wyndham as he tries to deal with his opium addiction, and then we're flashing back to an event that happened in 1905 when Wyndham dealt with the murder of someone in London that he knew. So we're flipping between the two different timelines, and the 1905 timeline deeply affected who Wyndham became. So very influential and an important part of his story. But honestly, I just think the writing style, the mystery, all of those elements, the characters just get better and better as we go through the series, and I'm really looking forward to picking up the next one now. And then the final book that I read was my book club's pick for November, and that is How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. And surprise surprise, this is another book that I have got mixed feelings on, because there were several elements of this book which I thought were 5-star. Thoroughly enjoyed them, loved it. And then there were some weaker elements which brought the overall rating of the book down. So the basic premise is that we have our main character, Grace, who makes a vow when she is 13 to murder all of her father's family, including her father, because he abandoned her and her mother. Her mother didn't know that her father was married. She had an affair with him. He didn't want anything to do with them. And Grace and her mother basically lived in poverty while her father was a very successful, very wealthy businessman. So his family lived in complete luxury. So there's a huge contrast. As a result, Grace makes this vow that she is going to systematically wipe out his family. And it is as twisted and dark as that. She literally sets about fulfilling that vow, and we are following along with her. The things that I thought were 5-star was the writing and Grace's character. She is an absolute mood. She is vile. Her complete disdain for most people around her, especially men and Instagram influencers, was just so entertaining. She was very cutting and sharp and dark, and I really enjoyed it. We're reading her story, her version of events basically. She, at the very beginning of the book, is imprisoned for a murder that she didn't commit, and she decides to instead write down about all the murders that she did commit, and that is what we are reading. So it's told very much from her perspective, but I just thought that she was brilliant. I really enjoyed it, and the first 100 or so pages I flew through. I was convinced it was going to be a 5-star read. It was just engaging and immersive and very readable, and as I say, Grace is not a character that you are meant to like, but I just absolutely loved her. I thought she was brilliantly done. It then starts to go a little bit downhill because it starts out, the initial murders are very complex, very dark, very twisted, and then it sort of loses its momentum a little bit, and the murders become a little bit more weak, and also actually not really caused by Grace directly. I don't know, it felt like it started really strongly and then just sort of lost its way as it went along, and I thought that was a real shame. I would also say that the ending, although it was a twist and I didn't see it coming, we are basically given a letter to read from another character, but we don't get Grace's response to it, and I thought that was quite strange given that we've read this book from the entire perspective of Grace all the way through, to then just be given this letter and not see what Grace's response to it was. And I can't decide if the author is setting up for a sequel or if it's sort of a reader, you decide what you think kind of thing. So a couple of things that were a shame, and it took my overall rating down from what would probably have been 5 stars to 3.54, but overall a very entertaining read, and I would definitely recommend it. If it's on your radar and you've been meaning to pick it up, then do. And that is it. They are the books that I read in the months of October and November. Do let me know if you read any of them and what your thoughts were. Let me know what your favourite read across the 2 months was. I'll be back in December with my festive reading wrap up, but for now, thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you soon.